They are Diane Musho Hamilton, Gabriel Menegale Wilson, and Kimberly Loh. And rather than read each of their bios, I'm going to tell you, first of all, that these three speakers are co-authors of a book called Compassionate Conversations: How to Speak and Listen from the Heart. And among them, they are teachers of Zen mediation, facilitators, conflict resolution specialists, leadership coaches, authors, organizational change consultants, specializing in diversity and inclusion. Thank you for that comment that you made about that issue earlier. Facilitators, transforming conflicts into creative opportunities for growth. They have collectively worked in many aspects of dispute resolution and communication and compassionate conversations. And it gives me great pleasure and even some relief to welcome these three speakers. I'm going to turn it over to Kim to start the presentation.
Thank
Julie,
you.
before we move over to Kim, I just wanted to. It's okay.
Then this is Maria Volpe, who's so important, and I completely steamrolled over her.
This is part of what we're all experiencing, and I just want to welcome everyone to our monthly breakfast. I am Maria Volpe. I'm professor at John Jay. Started these breakfasts after 9/11. Many of you have been with us. Many of our former speakers are with us here today. Welcome everyone. I can't think of a more timely topic for us today. Many of you think we probably planned this last month. We've been working with Kim since last April about her coming to New York at a time when we always planned for our speakers, particularly those who were from out of town, to come to New York City. And so she was going to be in New York on November 5th. And it so happens that we have been virtual now since April. All of these breakfasts are recorded. They are currently posted on the ACR-GNY website, www.acrgny.org. They will also be posted on the CUNY Dispute Resolution website.
You're muted, Maria, you're muted. Maria, you're muted.
I don't know how,
There
but
you go. Okay.
sorry, I don't know where I lost you. These are all posted on the www.acr-GNY website. We will also post them on the CUNY Dispute Resolution website. The breakfasts are co-sponsored by the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and the City University of New York Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College. This is our 231st breakfast since 9/11. It takes a village every month to put these together, and we have an amazing team of Julie Denny, Chuck Newman, Matthew Latimer, and Nikki Borofsky. We couldn't do it without everyone's help every month. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Julie, who will kick it off one more time with our
Kim, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Julie, Chuck, Nikki. And, it's a pleasure to be here. I feel intimidated and also excited and ready for this. And let me just turn it over to Diane and Gabe and get our voices here. Do you want to say hi, you two? Anything else you wanted to say to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm just really happy to be here. I lived in New York when I was a young woman, and it's great to feel the vigor and the energy and the willingness to have conversation of being basically in the New York scene, I would say. So thanks for having us, everyone. Looking forward to this morning.
Yeah, ditto. I was born in New York, so let's go. Good to be here.
All three of you left, I noticed.
Totally.
Yeah, and for myself, I came to New York in 2015 and I headed out around 2018. And it was just a very formative period of my life when I was getting deeper into conflict work. So I'm very grateful for this community. It was a wonderful resource, starting point, place to meet people, place to network. So just thank you all for who you are, and thank you, Maria, for leading this ship often. So in hearing us, the back and forth and the questions that people are raising today, how it's landing in me in this moment is as a question of who do we want to be? Who do we want to become in response to what's actually arising in our fields, politically, racially, the discontent, the injustice, the unfairness? Who do we want to become then in response to this is the way that I'm feeling it. And I see it as, I see it as scary, and I can understand why people fall into some levels of despair and fear and extreme anger. And at the same time, I cannot help but look for the opportunity in it, the opportunity for us to grow, the opportunity for us to learn more about who we are and learn about who the other is too, so that we can begin to really develop our common humanity and let that change the way that our societies actually run and how we meet. So that's kind of the starting place for me right now. The topic, the neurology of sameness and difference. I felt so in awe, actually, when I first started coming to this field, that people could be so learned, they could be so expert, they could be so skilled in their analysis, their knowledge of history. I looked up to my professors and people in my world a lot, and I wanted to grow my brain. Often what it felt like the desire was to grow my brain so that I could encompass more and more and somehow be more effective in the work, which is what I wanted, was to be able to help. And in the more recent years, being able to work closely with Diane and Gabe and write this book, where I think I've grown the most now is, yes, my brain matters. Yes, having a coherent sort of, mind for analyzing and looking at contradictions, incorporating the complexity, all of that is still important. But what I've really come to embrace now more fully is that as a human being, my faculties, my abilities are more diverse and myriad than just what's happening up here. And the neurology of sameness and difference, I think what we're alluding to or seeking to invite you into is a more, perhaps a more developed or advanced way of working with your interiors, working with the sensations, the feelings, the instincts, the gut things that happen in our gut that are also giving us information about who we can become in response to the conflicts that are in front of us and within us. And sameness and difference is a framework, distillation of much of Diane's work over the decades. She's a very accomplished practitioner in conflict resolution as well as Zen meditation. And so sameness and difference is her distillation as one way of pulling out this duality. And today's time together is largely going to be an exploration that we can go into so that each of you yourselves can be with us in this journey as we find out more about what does that really mean. And then when we can, see, feel, perceive who we are more clearly, I hope that leads to more informed choices about how we show up. There's a greater wisdom that we're including into who we are as practitioners and maybe just as human beings, because we were working with not just in the professional context, but people, in our homes too. How do we reckon with difference when it feels so divisive and sometimes painful? Can we accommodate the level of difference or help bring it into a space where it's actually productive to talk about it rather than let it tip over into threat where we just start shutting down? Are some things that we're going to explore. I think that's all I want to say about the topic, because Gabe's going to share a little bit about the perspective that he comes from. He has more of a deep knowledge of bringing things from an educational point of view, creating learning environments for people, which I think is really, really helpful for the people that we work with, you know. And then I will hand over to Diane, but maybe I'll just interrupt myself real quick because I forgot to put up a slide just to let you know that we have been working on this book, Compassionate Conversations. And I have just a quick slide to show you here. This is our book, and I invite you to please check it out. Compassionateconversations.com is our website. We're currently teaching our first 10-week course, and it's been incredible. We've had 125 people from around the world, and we're able to, you know, cross our cultures, check our assumptions, and ask, you know, what makes our conversations more productive, heartful, true, brave. And we have 2 more courses coming about next year, which I'm super excited about. So please feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk about any of that. And with that, thank you. And Gabe, over to you.
Kim. All right, let me see if I can get gallery view up here. All right, cool. So as Kim said, the word threat is an important one in this conversation, and I want to weave that in, but I want to say a couple of things high level. There was like the word urgency, and with respect to this different way of looking at ourselves, which is more from a embodied neurophysiological point of view, like we've all come into this call priorly primed, right? So to me, it was no surprise really that there was a good amount of charge in the space. Like we didn't come from a neutral space. Like our physiology was already primed, right? And to understand just the basic impacts of that priming, particularly of the defensive feeling threat, wanting to run, wanting to fight, wanting to freeze, is really important to take into account. So it was already woven into this space prior to us arriving, right? So just important to notice that, particularly for those in the States and for those internationally speaking, you might have been primed for another reason that might actually have been relaxing to you. So different primes, but just to point that out, just to point that out is really important. So there's a gentleman, his name is Bayo Akomolafe, he's Nigerian. And I love what he says, which is these times are urgent. We must slow down, right? It'll predispose us to making more deliberate choices of how we want to show up in any given moment. And so from a learning environment, I think what I want to say, I have some notes here. So times are urgent. The other thing is, I think like when I was listening to everyone, and this is no ding on anyone, I think it's just natural to the physiological state that we were all in, which is a little bit more primed. And I don't know about you, but maybe by show of hands, did you feel some anxiety or some kind of activation in your body during the conversation, during that networking period, just by show of hands? Yeah. So it's not a problem that we were all activated, but it's important to know that the more defended our nervous system is, the less curious we are. So curiosity and defensiveness, neurologically speaking, are literally just incompatible nervous systemically, right? And so when we have the intention of exchange and of sharing of points of view that actually might shift our point of view, which curiosity is an important ingredient for, we want to be attentive to that. So just neurologically speaking, it's important to know those two are not compatible, right? It doesn't mean that you can't exercise your nervous system to stay present and open, even during activation. It's just harder. It's a lot harder, right? The other thing, just in terms of the moment, from the point of view of polarization, perhaps part of the way that we respond to the crisis, perhaps, just a question to you, perhaps part of the way that we respond to the crisis is part of the crisis. Again, from this nervous system point of view. And so the other thing that I wanted just to name, because we can't really get into the deep neurology of it, but I'll throw some names out there. Peter Levine, trauma expert. Resma Menegale, trauma expert. And Stephen Porges, who put out the polyvagal theory, which breaks down the different, you could say, tracks in our body that are responsible for calming us down and activating us in a more defensive posture, whether to run, to fight, or to freeze, to feign death, right? So those are all just really awesome resources if you're curious to follow up. I think the most important thing that I want to say from that literature for the purposes of our conversation now is the distinction between neuroception and perception. Neuroception is the point that I'm having an impact on you before I even open my mouth. Right, the actual contours and like the way that my face is postured. If I have like a furrowed brow, or if you hear a tremor in my voice, that will all influence you. Right, so in that way, we're having these neuroceptive influences on each other prior to any more kind of overt interaction. And furthermore, we're co-regulating each other in that way, right? So if I come in anxious into a conversation with Diane and you can hear it in my voice, it's a little sharper, it's a little bit more choppy. My body is literally moving faster in more erratic ways. And then Diane responds like, what's going on? And her tone of voice literally is a soothing, lower timbre voice. It'll literally have an impact on me, just as much as I'm having an impact on Diane. So that's the neuroceptive dimension. I think the last thing I'll say is just in terms of, we're in an awful learning environment. We're in an awful learning environment with respect to social media, with respect to like the news that we watch, in that it provokes, it's provocative. One of the things that I was blown away by, like on Twitter, quote unquote, bad news spreads faster, 6 times faster than quote unquote good news on Twitter. Right, so just we're swimming in a lot of things that are stimulating us. So again, I think just the main point is that we're arriving to each other activated in defensive postures, most likely. And it's not to say that those energies aren't good. It's just that we need to be aware of them and how they're operating and influencing us neuroceptively prior to cognition in a way. So those are some of the just main points I wanted just to share. And I think I'll hand it over to Diane, which will basically take you more into a subjective exploration of what it's like to create difference in your body and what it's like to create sameness. In other words, how to cultivate that soothing quality in the system. Last thing I'll say really quick, when you are in a soothed state, you literally have the embodied sense of safety. And when you have the embodied sense of safety, all of your social apparatuses are online, right? So you're actually more attuned to people's faces. Your ear is literally more tuned to people's modulation and voices. So you're just in a more relaxed state and socially receptive. In other words, you're way more adaptive to engage social interactions in that state, if you can ride these waves of sameness and difference. So that's all I wanted to say. Over to you, Diane.
Everyone, just a little bit of an orientation to my work. I'm a mediator and I'm also a meditator. And I like to joke that I'm a talented mediator with not a lot of training, and I'm a kind of untalented meditator with lots of training. So before we get started, I'd actually like to ask you to put your notes down for just a moment, and let's come into the body a little bit. So if I could invite you into an upright posture, where you can just for a moment connect to gravity and to your sits bones wherever you're sitting, and just move side to side on your sits bones. Good, allowing your awareness to move into your torso and abdomen, and now back and forth. And just rotate around and feel the activation of gravity in the lower part of your body. And I just want you to open up the space of awareness, come to stillness. And for just a moment, feel everything there is to feel in the domain of sensation. And note in your body where you're feeling it. Are you feeling it in your gut, in your solar plexus, in the back of your neck? Notice if the sensations are pleasurable, relaxing, soothing, or if they're activated, tremulous, and basically moving you into motion. Because we're going to just examine these two basic states today, the state of sameness, coherence, and unity of body, speech, and mind, and the state of differentiation and excitement. And I want to propose to you for just a moment, if I could, that this exploration of unity and diversity, or of sameness and difference, is not simply human nature. It's literally an important consideration of the entire phenomenological universe. The universe is one coherent thing, but it evolves through the process of differentiation. The universe is one coherent thing made up, particularly our phenomenological world, made up of basic elements that are the same. Biologically, we function similarly. Coherence is absolutely part of our experience and unity, and yet we evolve through differentiation and integration. So within the domain of politics, we can kind of start to limit our view as to what the relationship to our sameness, let's say as a country and a world, and our differences are, but we have to be students of both. We have to have a deep understanding of how to bring unity about through the processes of, mediated dialogue would be one way, but we have to understand how to support, heighten differentiation and proceed to integration. So I want you to consider for a moment human development. And think for a moment about how, those of you who are parents or have children, think about the moment when your charming 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 9-year-old became 12 or 13. And that moment in which the sameness of the family suddenly became disrupted as the child started to differentiate and started to become different. And the disruption that you felt in your own body when you're standing on a street corner and your child who's always stood right next to you is now standing a few feet away and kind of giving a communication to everyone that you're different than they are. And that how, some of you are recognizing this experience. And there may be ways in which you can reflect on your own history when that happened to you, when you were absolutely the same as your family, even if your family was troubled or difficult, there was a profound identification with the family. And then suddenly, as an adolescent, your entire interest was in becoming different. Now, according to developmental theory, healthy development occurs when that differentiation becomes integrated. So we can become stalled when we're overly enmeshed and too identified. And we can become stalled when we're differentiated and can't find a way to reintegrate. So I want to propose to you today that to become students of both unity and diversity is what we need to do as mediator and conflict resolution professionals. So there's a saying in Zen, nirvana is another word for sameness or for coherence or becoming one. We say the mind of nirvana is easy to accomplish. It's the mind of difference that's difficult to attain. In other words, we know how to generate difference, but then we don't know how to reassert integration. And that's why I posed the question about this polarization, because the polarization is highly creative and there's a tremendous amount of combustion and tremendous amount of potential. But if we don't have the skills to inhabit it and then move back to unity, we are incomplete in terms of our skill set. Okay, so what I'm going to do today, based on a little bit on what Gabe said, and I'll make it slightly simpler, is that the experience of unity in the body of coherence tends to be, it's a soothing experience. So contemplate for a moment, when you enter a group of people who are friends, who dress like you do, who talk like you do, who you've known for a long time, who you feel familiar with, how walking into a room, the body becomes relaxed. You have the sensation of belonging. You feel that you're going to be accepted. There's just a kind of an easefulness that sets in. And now imagine for a moment walking to a group of people that you don't know, who don't look like you, who probably don't have your beliefs or share your same language, and just feel for a moment the arousal that happens in the nervous system. Suddenly there's an excitement because something new is about to happen. And that's why it's so evolutionarily important to us. And yet that excitement can become threat really, really quickly. Whereas you may have been experiencing feel-good hormones like oxytocin when you're in a really warm, inviting, belonging space, the brain will start to drip, as you know, adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, stress hormones that are excitement-oriented, that are priming you, as Gabe said, priming you to act, actually start to enter your nervous system. There's a reason people serve alcohol when we're trying to bring people together. It's to relax the sensation of that nervousness, right? So, but that nervousness is where growth is. So it's important for us to really understand it and work with it, not to make it wrong and bad and trying to always reestablish continuity or commonality, but to be fluid in terms of moving to both, through both, and as professionals, understanding that we have to start working with the body, that we spend so much time working with the mind, but we don't work nearly often enough with the body. Okay? So I want you to notice for just a moment, if 1 is an experience of high differentiation of stress hormones and excitement in the body, and 10 is just the most relaxed, open, present experience of oneness, just put in the chat for a moment, where are you on that scale? So for me, I can feel the flavor of oneness and belonging, like there's a friendliness I feel in my position. And yet down the core of my body, I can feel this tremulousness, and I can hear it a little bit in my speech and feel it in my mind. So I'm going to give myself actually about a 6.5, that I'm more towards sameness, but I've got this little bit of differentiation and excitement in my body. So I'd just be curious to see, when you scan your body, where are you on that scale from complete coherence to complete excitement and differentiation, readiness to move? Just curious. Oh, here we go. Okay, good. Oh, we've got a 10. Great. 6, 6, 8.
And a 4.
And a 4. Yes, exactly. Yeah, 8, 6. So yeah, so if I'm a mediator and I'm working with this group, then I'm just going to notice that there's a range, that we're not highly coherent. We're not in an optimal learning environment. We have to become more coherent to learn. Okay, but I think for our purposes, what I'm going to do is just go the opposite direction. I'm going to heighten the experience of difference, and then we're going to move to the experience of sameness, so you can compare and contrast this. Okay, so taking a deep breath, everybody. And breathing out, lengthening the exhale, allowing cognition to quiet down. So in the Zen tradition, we say that the mind of two and the mind of one are extremely important for us to know. And that ultimately we want to be able to function freely with unity and with diversity. So I would like to explore the mind that sees difference, or the mind of two. So let yourself just identify for a moment with all the distinctions that you make in the course of your day, from small ones between I like this shirt to I don't like that shirt, to big ones like I dislike the Democratic Party, or I don't want to live in this country anymore. Just explore the mind of difference, and let's just see what comes up for you. Gabe and Kim are going to call on you when you raise your hand, but there's so many of us on the call that there's a good chance they won't see you. So just plug into the chat if you would like, or listen into what other people are saying and see how that identifies with their experience. So we're going to explore the mind of difference, then the mind of one, and then the mind of integration. So the mind of difference, tell me about you. Just what do you notice? And you can raise your hand or you can put it into the chat. The mind of difference, what do you notice?
Physically, is that?
Physically, in the mind, emotionally, whatever comes up, everything, your entire sense perceptions. We're interested in all of it. As the mind of difference, what do you notice?
Tense.
I feel tense.
Tension.
Yes. There's tension, because where there's two, there's tension. It's either creative, it's erotic, it's aggressive, but there's always tension where there's two. Excellent. What else do you notice?
Fear.
Harvey? Go ahead, Julie, and then maybe Harvey Newman after that.
Fear.
Fear.
Okay, good. Yeah. And so keep in mind is that word primed, that fear actually helps us to act, and that the situation we're in, we want to be in something different. Excellent. What else do you notice?
Yeah, I felt a heavy heart. I felt some anger, fear.
Yes, that's right. So there can be emotional textures to the experience. It could be fear.
I didn't like getting out of that wonderful feeling that I was in.
Just a second ago. Yeah, absolutely. We'll go back there. We'll go back there. Go ahead, Ken.
Goodman. Kathy Goodman. Yeah, go ahead.
Unmute yourself.
Yeah, you're muted, my friend.
Dissonance, confusion.
Dissonance and confusion, yeah, that can happen. I mean, one of the challenges developmentally, everybody, is we as mediators, we think holding perspectives is an easy thing. Like everyone should be able to hold multiple perspectives. It's actually very stressful on the human nervous system to have more than one truth in the mind. So good. Confusion, overwhelm is another experience people can have. What else do you notice about this mind of difference?
Oh, here's one. It's where I feel most creative.
Absolutely. You have to, in order to create something new, it has to be different from what is, right? So there's creative tension and creative excitement as well. So the excitement of difference is really great. When it crosses over into threat or loss or the feeling of pain, then it becomes much more difficult to manage and more problematic, but it'd be quite exciting when we encounter difference. Excellent.
I would like to share that as a Zen meditator myself, I feel it feels very natural to have dualistic thinking. And so the moment I realize I am being drawn into that is really the moment I get to have a non-dualistic experience. Very much like the moment you realize that your mind has gone is the moment you're back. But it feels very natural to walk through the day in the moments just constantly being torn to good, bad, right, wrong, like, dislike. I mean, it's just such a natural experience.
It's the nature of language.
Yeah.
So one thing for everybody to know is that our prefrontal cortex that gives us this incredible gift of language is the newest part of the brain, right? Where the old reptilian brain is this fight or flight response. And then the limbic brain, the mammalian brain, has a lot to do with human bonding and emotion. So language gives us, it supports our ability to distinguish. And so when we think, we're often thinking in oppositions, for and against, right, wrong, what I should do, what I shouldn't do. But I'll tell you just a quick story, everybody. Helen Keller when she was learning, she was in an undifferentiated experience in which language and her experience weren't there. And so when her teacher taught her the word water, put the word water on her hand, gave her the experience of water, suddenly she understood water and everything else differentiated. She understood sky and grass and building and fence. One word allowed everything to differentiate. So language is this incredible thing that allows us to make distinctions, but then we don't know when to stop often. We just get absorbed in that and we stay there. And meditation is really helping us drop back to a non-languaging experience that is much more unified. But they're both important to our evolution and our being. Thank you so much.
I also do meditation. So part of what I feel is subjectively, frustration, like, why can't the other person feel this way?
I want to be together. I want to be the same.
But the other is a certain matter of acceptance, because I've lived in a lot of different places with people who are not like me and don't think like me and are very different. And I've done counseling with them. And so there's a certain acceptance that there will always be differentiation.
Yes, absolutely. As I said, that's the process of evolution, is differentiation and complexity. So, and we're both. Unity is infinite, and so is differentiation. Have you ever been in a fight with your spouse or friend or partner where it seems like it's like the more you get into it, the more there is to fight about? Have you ever had that experience where it just seems like the differences just become endless and you can't?
It escalates.
It escalates because they're endless. I mean, if I start to ask you as the mind of difference, what are some of the differences that you think are inherent on the call right now? Just in our conversation, what are some of our differences? Let's note them a little bit. Thank you, Ellen. What are some of our differences? I heard some political differences. I heard some differences in terms of history and worldview and what we believe about government. I heard differences in terms of what people wanted from the conversation or what questions they had. What other differences have you noticed? Cultural differences, geography. I'm looking in the chat right now. Life experience.
Charles Stewart has his hand raised.
Yeah, hi. I'm about the difference between professional and amateur, because I'm an amateur, but I'm amidst mediator professionals. But I kind of like those differences.
Yeah, they're exciting. And that's how you grow. Because there's some gap to be closed, right? There's some experience I'm having. There's some other experience that I could have. Excellent. So just think about it for a moment, guys. Just the number of differences on the call. If we focus exclusively on differences, race, gender, age, politics, view of government, geography, how could we ever possibly come together? I mean, they're endless, right?
Well, here's another one that's critical. Comfort in speaking in a large group versus shyness and withdrawal.
Precisely. Excellent. So we're going to shift gears now. I just want you to appreciate and feel for a moment that you have this capacity to distinguish and how important it is. Kim, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I just wanted to ask if before we shift, we could maybe just share some of the flavors, the sensations in the body. Just to name it and make it more real, and it's interesting to hear among us. Like for me, for myself, earlier before we started and people were having our exchanges, I could definitely feel like increased heart rate, gentle tension kind of behind the eyes. I'm trying to, remember things, and like trying to make sense of it. So those are two places I feel it.
And those sensations, when we're experiencing different, are usually more activated and more elevated. They can be pleasurable, as in creative tension, erotic tension, possibility, or they can become threatening in terms of, I'm not sure if I'm going to be received. Are these people going to accept me? Is this really going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Or it could also be that there's a feeling of separation. And the feeling of separation itself can be stressful. Good, Kim. Does anybody else want to add to that again?
Hi, it's Toby. The way I've been processing some of what you're saying is experiencing the difference between the comfort of being home and being home with family, with your furniture and your belongings and your curtains and your kitchen, and the just extreme exquisite comfort of that if you travel a lot, as I have for many years. And then the thrill of
Exactly.
arriving where you're going when you are traveling, which is a completely different feeling, equally wonderful and completely different, and very disruptive and confusing, and the time zones create issues. And yet there's nothing like for me, I would say there's nothing like waking up in the morning in a city I've never been in before.
It's thrilling. I love that word, thrilling.
Yeah.
But both states, and here's the thing, everyone, both states, we're in such a dynamic experience of unity and diversity, because when imagine staying in that home with everything that was familiar and not ever being able to get out, like how claustrophobic it becomes. And the same with travel. The difference all of a sudden becomes stressful and fatiguing, and you just want to return home.
Yeah.
And it's true in our groups as well. When we're able to be in groups that have a really fundamental sense of belonging, difference is necessary in order for groups to grow and change, right? So if we just belong, pretty soon we get bored, complacent, it doesn't feel good. Then we need the diversity and the difference. But if we have too much difference and too much diversity, then it's too stressful and we don't feel relieved and we're not able to be there. So this is why I'm wanting to explore this. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm finding it very ironic listening to people during this pandemic and this physical distancing that they're starting to feel like their homes are prisons.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And
Because
that's a very shocking reality for me, because I'm still feeling that my home is my safety net, my safe place.
all the closet contemplatives are super happy with this pandemic.
Evolutionarily, this is a very new experience that we're all, most of us anyway, are sitting in the comfort of our homes right now. And yet here we are in the homes of, many, many others. That kind of contrast between the public and the private has never been possible technologically until the last couple of years. So it's interesting that we're adapting and evolving as we're participating right now, and that's
Isn't it
obviously
amazing?
it's obviously going to call forth different experiences and sensations and perceptions than we've ever really experienced before.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brad. All right, everyone, I would like now for you to shift your identity, and instead of identifying with the mind of two that can experience difference and discernment and contrast, I would like you to identify now, if you would please, with the mind of one. And if you don't know what that means, that's fine. Just identify with the mind of one, of oneness, of sameness, of unity. And I want to hear what comes into your perception now and what is that like? Yeah, usually a quality of calm will start to pervade your nervous system. Expansiveness, there are very few boundaries. Maybe you feel complete, absolutely.
Charles Stewart.
Thank you. Yeah, I jumped to Thanksgiving because it's November, but immediately the red flags go up because we're not supposed to have too many people in our living room or dining room. And so what kind of Thanksgiving is coming?
Yeah, that's a question, isn't it? Now, let's notice something together. So when I talk about the mind of sameness or oneness, one of the things that we can do is to notice that we could stay in the present, because where there's past and future in the mind, there's a difference. So the mind of oneness, you actually collapse into the here and now, because the mind isn't thinking about remembering the past or thinking about the future. So what happens if you just notice the here and now? What comes up for you? What do you notice? Whoever the gentleman was that was just talking.
Charles.
Hi. I'm stuck back 5 minutes ago on the question of the body, and finding that a difficult one. So I'm mulling it, and I'm still with the body, differentiated with a queasy stomach and a stiff throat.
When with the oneness, I just I saw black, just so black. You're wearing black, and tech people wear black, but in terms of the unison.
You and I had the same dress and the same glasses on, I noticed. We're really the same. And the same lip color, look at that. Your hair is nicer than mine.
But blackness, I mean, that's all the same.
Absolutely, no distinctions. Very good, very good. Good, what else do you notice? Just identify as the mind of one and allow yourself to relax, and just tell me what you notice.
Ocean.
Comfort.
Ocean.
Ocean, say more about ocean, Kathy.
Just found what surfaced for me was a very calm ocean. There was movement and there was energy in it, but there was a quality of stillness and wholeness.
And buoyancy too. I'm hearing buoyancy as well. Wonderful. Very good. Now, think of yourself, I'll come to you in 1 second, Nelton, just one second. Just notice how in your work, those of you who do mediate, just notice how this is a state that you're often communicating to the parties, to put them at ease, to help them relax, so that they can learn and not be threatened, as Gabe said. Go ahead, Melton.
I don't know how I feel is actually oneness, but somehow when I feel oneness, my curiosity ends. Because there is no diversity, I feel like one with everyone. I don't feel like asking questions. I feel as one, united, and my somehow curiosity finishes.
Yeah, there can be both, because Eckhart Tolle one time said that a man became enlightened, or a woman became enlightened by watching a cat watch a mouse hole. So there's this little quality of potentiality, because something might change, that's that entry of diversity that keeps everything a little bit on its toes. Excellent, thank you. What else do you notice? Vulnerability, yes. Tranquility, empowerment. Very good, everybody.
Openness.
Openness, absolutely. Availability, whatever is going to come, you're open to it. And I just want everyone to notice right now how you changed your mind state, your mind and your body, just how quickly the suggestion of the mind of two brought up a certain kind of experience, and the mind of one changed it. This is important for us to really start to get on a very deep level. Are there others that have comments about this mind of one?
See Lewis's hand up.
Yeah, so I'm one of the people who got into the political debate earlier, and now that I got into the oneness, it reminded me that underneath, the person I was in dispute with, we probably both want the same things.
Absolutely.
It's just that we're looking at it from two different sides, and that is that leaves the ability to have this discussion if we can just have the mutual respect and say, let's dig down a little deeper. And
so the mind of oneness, as you're saying, Lewis, the mind of oneness reveals our deep commonality. And so the first two chapters, the first chapter is really why we use evolution to talk about compassionate conversations. The second chapter is about our commonality and how radical it is and how important it is, and how our values, our desire to be happy, our waking up to the same sun in the morning, experiencing birth, old age, all these commonalities we have as human beings. Right now, with the focus on diversity, sometimes we fail to build and to really explore and deepen that commonality. It's taken for granted. And then on the other hand, our diversity is what creates that creative tension. If we go back to that conversation and the two of you look at what you're really wanting and needing, we all know this, that you have shared interests, shared outcomes. But as long as we're threatened, as Gabe said, it's very difficult to really feel into that. So thank you for sharing that, Louis. I appreciate that.
Can I just add something, because that occurs to me, Diane, is when you're saying that, is that you know, you've been emphasizing the importance of both, and to be able to know that place in ourselves. And I think one of the reasons why in culture I detect a lot of backlash against new thought, unity thinking, is because it hasn't quite been able to integrate and make space for the truth of our differences. And so I think people sometimes get frustrated against, you know, certain kinds of like promotions of like, let's all just be the same, I'm colorblind now. And it's like, it's not trustable, and it's not real for us, because we haven't been able to include the truth of our differences really with open eyes, you know. So it's not about downplaying that stuff in order to be in the mind of one. That's just the point that I wanted to make.
It's an excellent point. And I also just want to remind everybody that human survival has always depended on belonging, and that threat has always come in the form of difference. And one of the unfortunate parts of human history is these differences have been, I don't know quite what the word is, but they've resulted in injustice and oppression in a really sustained, systemic way. And it's very hard to tease apart the history of injustice from what is the nature of our differences really, and how can we both integrate and find commonality while respecting and maintaining those differences, because they're very important to our identity. So thank you, Kim, for raising that. It's really important. Is there anybody else that wants to speak from the mind of one?
Maybe, what you say, I had a few thoughts. One is what you're saying sort of reminds me of John Lewis's idea of making good trouble, which I always love, and I've always loved the way he says it and said it. And I also wanted to mention that what you were talking about a moment ago, how the mind of two, sort of the way it's related to threat, it's also related to some of the greatest art that's ever been made.
Absolutely.
And
it's also related to science.
And yeah, maybe just the greatest explorations of the soul that have ever been produced, that end up forming art or science. I also wanted to mention that I've been, because of things relating to the elections, I have to confess that I've been kind of frantic for about 3 days.
So just for a moment for the listeners, Toby. So Toby's speaking from her self-identity right now. She's not speaking from the mind of one. So my guess is she's speaking both one and two. So I'm going to track this. So go ahead, Toby.
So it's been about 3 days that I've been frantic, and I didn't eat, and I haven't been able to sleep. I mean, I've been up all night working, writing and working, because there was no point even trying to sleep. And I knew I wanted to be here.
Good.
And it's interesting that I have become so much calmer in this meeting, in this wonderful meeting. It's amazing. It's such a relief to feel calm again, to feel the way I normally feel, because I've just been a divided human for several days now.
Yeah. And where there's division, there's tension.
Yeah.
So yeah. And also probably, Toby, based on what you're telling me, I'm hearing also there's probably some threat, some quality of threat in your system. Is that fair?
Well, I in my mind, the election is in many ways related to the COVID issue and the fact that it, you know, that the way it's been handled and that so many thousands of people have lost loved ones. And I find that unbearable that there's so much
Terrible. Yeah.
in the country.
Absolutely.
So it's connected with grief, I guess, now that you're bringing that up. Yes.
Well, thank you. Thank you for just letting us know. And I'm happy that you're feeling more calm.
Thank you.
By coming to the call. So one more move, everybody, before we wrap this up. I would like you now, and I want you to marvel. I just want you to marvel for a moment at your ability to move from identifying with two to identifying with one. And now I'm going to ask you to identify with one and two, because that's our true nature, is we're the same, we're deeply the same, and we're infinitely different from one another. And both are true. So I would like you now to identify with the mind of one and two and tell me what you notice. Yeah, Maya Angelou says that belonging everywhere and nowhere is true belonging. That's the mind of unity. Absolutely. Can I say more about identity? I think I'll wait until the questions, just so I can stick with your experience for a minute, and then we can pick that up. Yes, so the duality of one and the mind of two, that's what makes relationships so dynamic and wonderful. For someone who just got married, is that you're the same and you're moving into this tremendous intimacy together, and you're experiencing difference, which makes it exciting until it becomes threatening. And so learning how to negotiate our differences is so important in any kind of relationship. Good people on both sides, Trump's comment may have some merit. Yeah, I think we can find a way for that to have merit. It doesn't mean, however, that oppressing others is on the table. Empathy. Good, you guys, you're great. You're really getting this. So I just want to assert now that as people interested in conflict resolution and as professional mediators, you're doing this naturally all the time. But sometimes we have to heighten difference and bear the sensations longer than we want to. And I also want you to notice that you're in this freely function integrative place. And as we become more conscious, we can actually make choices of when to become the same and when to differentiate. So it looks like Lewis has his hand up. Go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of complements what I said before. I guess I might have been in more of the one and two mind. That on the one hand, I recognize that deep down we're the same. On the other hand, I recognize we saw things from two sides of two sides of the issue.
Yes.
And,
and how could you be phenomenologically or essentially separate? You can't be. You're influencing and affecting one another. You're breathing the same air, right? Very good. Wonderful.
Some hands, Diane, Vivian, and then Michelle.
Great, thanks, Kim. Vivian, go ahead.
Thank you. My son came to visit me just before during the elections while he was voting. We had a 2-hour conversation, and as people know here, that my son is a Trumpy, and it was just fascinating talking to him. So we're one because he's my son. We're two because we're so terribly different, but we also couldn't communicate. And so I'm very interested about your compassion conversations, because it seems like I want to be able to go in somehow, and I want him to come in somehow. And we are just two, for definitely two. And so how is it possible to have some way of, that you can still be two, but there still can be some understanding?
Yes, absolutely. So again, I want everyone to understand that being able to entertain perspectives that are different than your own and actually just listen and take them in is actually like a yoga, because it's hard on the nervous system to hear things that are not our truths. But listening is the skill of oneness. When we drop our preconceptions and we drop our reference points and we tune to the experience of the other and we say, well, what do you think? And we're not saying, what do you think? So I can tell you what I think, but we're saying, what do you think? And tell me. And I want to really hear and listen. We're actually becoming the same. So listening is always soothing when it genuinely happens. The question people always have is, how can we actually bring genuine listening? Some people have the experience, I'm willing to listen, but they're not, and vice versa. So one of the things I would just suggest is saying, I am so interested in you and I comparing notes, but I'm wondering, can we have a little ground rule that we actually do some turn taking and really make sure that we're listening and receiving each other? And lots of times people will say, no, I don't want to do that. And then you know that it isn't really about coming together. So, but if it's about at least understanding each other, you can simply ask for that. And sometimes you'll have success with that simple request. Thank you.
And hi there. Thank you so much for showing up so early today. The things that come up for me, the quote that came up for me was, we're not just one drop in the ocean, but we're the entire ocean in one drop. This idea of significance and holding both as truth and equally true. I was thinking about difference and how in the extreme, how difficult it is for us to access our prefrontal cortex, and how social media in particular, polarization through memes and things like that, has actually weaponized difference. Caused us to find our corners and polarize the discussion, and how we really need to move away from sort of this otherization and dehumanization of folks, and because there's too much difference right now that is highlighting. I think something that Gabe was talking about, how bad news spreads 6 times faster than good news. I think
that's evolutionary predisposed. We have a negativity bias, everybody, because that's how we sense threat and protect ourselves. Yeah.
The other statistic that I was noticing was that false news is 10 times faster.
Because it's probably super dramatic, right?
Exactly.
So we have to notice what grabs our attention. I mean, basically what I hear you saying, Michelle, is that this new innovation, as Brad was pointing out, this incredible online, is actually tremendously ungoverned. We don't know how to govern ourselves. We don't know how to govern each other. And we're going to have to mature through processes where we actually learn. Maybe people start new sites that are mediated sites, or maybe people talk about the importance of commonality. The challenge is that where there's difference, there's excitement, and that grabs our attention. That's the evolutionary thing that we're going to have to really take into account as we start to imagine ways to work with this. I mean, I like to think of the internet as the Wild West. There's just it just literally has not been domesticated yet. So thanks for thinking about that. And I hope you come up with some great ideas for how we can work with it.
Thank you. I just have a thing. I know I'm taking a bit of time here, but I run restorative justice circles. And, the idea of victim and perpetrator, talking about difference. But a lot of times victims, there's not a lot of people who stand up for them. Like we have a lot of talk about the civil rights movement and how to be a better ally. And the idea of standing up for victims is the idea of difference. The idea of standing with the perpetrator, a lot of times that's gravity. That's what default. When you do nothing and when you say nothing, you're standing with the perpetrator, and that's sameness, right? There's a comfort in just not doing anything. And so I just want to point that out, that difference sometimes can work in your favor, that you actually need to stand up and speak and in order to be a better ally.
Yeah, so when we start to bring this teaching into the domain of social justice, I think there's a lot of nuance that could be taken a step further in terms of when do we align and when do we not? When are those labels helpful? When are they limiting? How does that work? Like, there's a lot to be explored and understood about that. Thank you, Michelle. So you guys, I want to actually leave us time for questions. So I think we're freely functioning in the mind of sameness and difference. And so I'd love to open it up to inquiry and questions. And I just need to turn my notifications off.
Lyle had his hand up.
I'm sorry, I have the ability with a computer right now to get my picture in here, but I'm a law professor in Massachusetts at Suffolk University. And, I'm very interested in the question of how we can constructively not only learn this ourselves as instructors, but help our students understand the choice that we're making, because we're wrestling with the whole question of how to be a more diverse and inclusive profession, and certainly in the legal education world, but also law student well-being and professionalism. So look forward to reading the book, but I welcome any just brief insights, because I have a chance to talk to my faculty about some of these issues next Thursday, and I would like to be able to say something that makes sense.
Well, I think, I think the challenge for the law, honestly, is I think there are three things that make the law a difficult environment. And we're going to have to think about this together. And I think it's true of our elections as well, is that analysis, which is the mind of differentiation, is the main tool, that it's fueled by competition, and that winning and losing is the outcome. And at least when things go to trial. So the question is, can we develop a skill set next to that one, which I think the mediation skill set is really helpful for, around inclusion, around listening, around sameness, and around not using, I mean, the thing is modernism has depended on the truth of difference, right? And so how does the truth of holism also, how does that enter our discourse? So that's a really big conversation. I'd love to have that with you sometime. I worked in the judiciary. My husband's the former Chief Justice of the Utah court system. And so I've given that a lot of thought, and I've actually taught in law schools and at bar events a lot. So I'd be more than happy to have that conversation.
Sure. Thank you.
And Gabe and Kim, I'd love for you guys to field some questions as well.
Cool. Yeah, I see Kathy and Melton. Hands are up.
There are two people have their hands raised.
Hi. I may be throwing a curveball, but I'm working on integration. So Peter Coleman's basic concept, he's a professor at Columbia University, essentially says that conflict is based on scarcity of resources. So I highly appreciate the momentum you've built with us with the neuro inner dynamics that we have, but can you assist me at all at integrating Peter's basic concept?
I can certainly respond. I'd like to give Kim or Gabe an opportunity. Do either of you want to respond?
Yeah, I can say a few words to start us off, if that would.
Okay, great.
So I can completely understand the idea, and it makes sense to me, and particularly when I was working more in international domains, it just seemed clear to me that there are some practical reasons, sort of beyond ideas or even values, but just practical, tangible reasons why we're held in conflict patterns. But I also see the spectrum nature of it. And if we think of one kind of resource is water, another kind of resource might be attention. And maybe in the world that we're in, I don't think that there's one thing I can say that can neatly sort of be overlapped across the whole spectrum of it. But I think that what I'm interested in the inquiry is testing some of the parts which are not so given. How can I put that in more concrete terms? So say if we're people standing around water or standing around food. If I take it as a given that my tribe deserves all the food, my family deserves all the food, it's going to lead to conflict in a specific way. But if I have the relationship to the other and I see them the same as me, and I expand my notion of family or tribe to include their humanity, the way that we will relate to the conflict changes. And that's where I think that I can begin to integrate some of these ideas about sameness and difference, and where I think we're being challenged evolutionarily to look into the eyes of the other and ask, are you same as me? do you also share this humanity? Do you also share this desire to eat and be safe with your people? Because if we can get there and agree that that's true among us, then I think the nature of the conflict will change, and how we share what is existing will change. And I'll just share the final thought that's coming to my mind. And Gabe, you probably know the wording of this better, but Joanna Macy's quote, you know, we may not make it, but at least we can go down looking into each other's eyes. And it may be dismal, a little bit apocalyptic, but there's something very sincere in that for me about, you know, our relationships and what's possible. Thanks. Gabe or Diane? Do you want to speak to the question?
I just have a short thing, a small thing to share. And I think that is a lot of the reading that I've done on this particular question is that there actually isn't a scarcity of resources. There are plenty of resources. The issue is that we haven't yet learned how to share properly and how to distribute properly. It's more our greed and our sense of shortcoming in ourselves, and not because we can feed the planet and we don't, just to use the most basic example. Okay.
Meltem had a question.
Recently, I have taken the course from Ken Klock, the art of asking questions, which made me think so much further. And my question to you, in our society, we tend to, as a humanity, we tend to give opinions, and we think that that's the dialogue, and we each gives their opinions and kind of turns to debate at times. But I understand the power of asking questions to bring unity, because asking questions is uniting and answering is more divisive. What is that initial feeling coming from? Is it from sameness, difference? I mean, approaching to our topic, is it the one mind that wanting to, or the divisiveness of the mind is asking the question or not desiring to ask questions?
Gabe, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say, but just in short, it depends on if I put a developmental lens over that. If I look at it through the process of human development, there's a very specific stage in our development where we're actually mastering what we know. You see it a lot in people in their 18, early 20s. We're mastering what we know, and sometimes we get stuck there. But if we continue to grow, we start to see that what we know is in contrast to what we don't know, and to what is actually unknowable. And that becomes a much bigger reference point. And so that it's almost like we stand on the platform of our expertise, and then we're able to let it go.
Jeremy Lack wanted to ask a question.
Before we go to Julie, I think to Meltem.
Sorry, Gabe.
No, you're okay. I think when I would kind of put the reference point of sameness and difference not on the question, but on the group. So I would just notice when you pose a question to a group, just as Diane has done with you, like, what's the impact on the group? Does the group actually quiet down and consider? That's sameness. They've entered a similar mind space. Or you just drop the question, you just throw in a perspective that you're not hearing, and it creates sameness. Like it could, so my reference point would just shift over to the group. And I wonder how that would shift how you play with questions, you know? And differences are enlivening. And as Diane said, sometimes a question can be so provocative that it kind of knocks the room out. And you kind of lose the curiosity that couldn't cohere people. But that'd be my comment, yeah. Julie, go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Jeremy had his hand up. He wanted to say something.
I was just listening to Diane, and I was just thinking about human nature. You know, we are unique, each of us. We're identical at the same time, and we're different. And the different saliences which make us feel that we are the same in group or that we are different out of group can be triggered and primed instantaneously at different moments. And there's a whole movement looking at social plasticity based on this. And even when we're all together now on a screen sharing this, when we're doing the exercises you've been showing us today, we're basically creating within us an in-group script and triggering that within us, but we do have this social plasticity. And so Diane, I was just struck by what you were saying before, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the research of Olga Klimicki, but she has been looking at social plasticity, looking at different parts of the brain that are switched on and off. And even the simple exercise of, for 1 minute, speaking about a shared future and a vision of the future creates and triggers a pro-social script as opposed to an antisocial script. So there's a lot of things we can do very clearly, but it's just, you know, useful to have an understanding of which neural mechanisms are being affected and how we can switch on or off certain systems that are heuristics that are identical in all of us. They just are in abeyance most of the time.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
So I can see Harvey has a hand up, but I also just wanted to extend an invitation for anyone who hasn't spoken on the call. If there's something you want to share or ask about, you're very welcome to.
Yeah, the more that I've gotten into the field of embodiment, the more I recognize that what we all have in common is that we have all gone through trauma, and trauma that is generally unconscious, and that all of these other things, all of these belief systems that we have adopted feed into, to a large extent, that trauma. And so it's not about getting to the things that we believe in, but getting to the trauma itself. That's really, I think, the most important part of us evolving as human beings.
Yeah, and I would say two things in relationship to what you just said. I'm bringing your face up on my screen, is that our relationship to trauma is profound and deep in the body, and also our resilience and our anti-fragility as a human being is also very deep and embodied. And I think as we get more and more, as we start to understand this more and more, we're going to be able to really, I think The Body Keeps Score is the name of Bessel van der Kolk's book. Now I forgot what I was going to say, that second thing. Two things, everyone. Joe Biden does that a lot. Number one, resilience. Number two, and then now I'm forgetting.
Here's the deal.
Here's the deal. Thank you for that comment about trauma.
Oh, I can see there's a question from Gary.
Oh, I know what it was. It was just that our belief systems and our bodies are always in a feedback loop. And so one of the things we can do is learn to relax our cognition, allow the body to process, then re-engage cognition. And often you'll find that there's more space as well as more compassion in the mind. Go ahead, Kim, sorry.
Mm-hmm. And side note, there's a specific chapter in our book where we talk about that, and we offer a transmuting emotions process that someone could work through, you know, in their own time. Gary, can we bring you on?
Sure, thanks. I'd like to know what a compassionate conversation between an ardent Trump supporter and an ardent Biden supporter looks like, sounds like. We've probably all had arguments with people of the opposite faith. So the question is, how do you have a compassionate conversation that works perhaps for both sides and actually reveals something and maybe even develop some notions of commonality? What in fact does that conversation look like? We kind of know what it doesn't look like. What does it look like?
Mitra has a suggestion. Talk about something that isn't politics with the other.
Well, I'm talking about where you would actually be talking about politics. We can all talk about sports and the weather and other things that are good to talk about. I have lots of in-laws who are Trump supporters. And for the most part, we avoid politics. My question is, how do you have the difficult political discussion on the issues that are important to all of us, perhaps in a compassionate way, so that it can actually, so it's meaningful, so neither side is walking away never wanting to speak to the other side again, and figuring out where there are common concerns and perhaps even common approaches, or knowing exactly further what the differences are.
Well, I can say a few things about that, Gary, because my my brother, well, I have 3 brothers who are all militarily trained, but my oldest brother particularly is a Trump supporter. And so I've had lots of conversations with him over the last 4 years. And I would say one thing, when we teach these skills, there's some good news and some bad news. And what we tell our students and our participants is that the good news about learning these skills is you can use them. And the bad news is then you have to.
So the example is?
The example is, I just want to give a little preface though, the example is that almost always we have to demonstrate first some willingness. So my brother isn't a mediator, he doesn't do this kind of work. So I have a certain kind of, you might say, privilege in relationship to him. So I listen, I inquire, I ask him, I always ask permission. Are you willing to hear what I have to say about this and just see a place where we might have some difference? And almost inevitably he'll say yes. And then I'll tell him and he'll say, well, I agree with you about that. And then he'll go back and I'll say, well, that's great. We've got some agreement about that. And I said, and the one thing I think I'll often say, remind him is the one thing is, it's important for you and I to really not allow the media to mediate our relationship. You know, so what do we really think? But it requires generosity, it requires listening. And I've done it for the last 4 years with him. And I do feel that I give up in a certain way my self-righteousness. And I give up an exclusive view on what's true. And sometimes I don't always like that I give that up. And that's a hard thing for me to sometimes swallow, but that's how they look. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's a start, yes, thank you. And I have tried to do the same at times. It can be difficult, but
yeah.
I think it's something we all have to actually work at.
Yeah, I agree. It's work.
If I could jump in for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just came from a Zoom last night with a organization called Braver Angels. You might want to look that up, braverangels.org. It's a grassroots movement to help Blues and Reds dialogue.
Nice.
Cool. Just to, Gary, speak to your inquiry, I think you implicitly did it in terms of how does the conversation look like. You initiated, at least for me, how the conversation starts, which is simply to say, like, I want to have a compassionate conversation where the intentions that we affirm are commonalities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think just really clarifying, explicating the intention that any of us want in the conversation is step number 1 for me. So when you come into our space, we explicate the intention, right? Like today, the intention was to explore sameness and difference. You came in because you're interested. If you're not interested in sameness and difference, you don't come. So in common conversation though, I'll oftentimes just ask people, hey, like, what's your intention or desire through this conversation? Like, what do you want to get from it? I'll sometimes just pause people because I have like no idea where they're coming from. Like, do you want to have a debate? Do you want to clarify your thoughts? Do you want me to come at you and help you clarify those thoughts? Like, what do you want? That's been really helpful, Gary. Yeah.
And I think that the challenge is that goes back to the issue of curiosity that we sort of started, Gabriel, with your conversation, right? And I think when we think about polarization and sort of, you know, evolutionarily, like, bias was helpful. Like we have these shortcuts so that when we like saw fire, we're like, oh, our brain recognizes fire. We're not going to keep playing with fire. But like a curious person would like play with fire like several times and try to like figure it out, right? And so like something that was helpful to our brain because they were shortcuts, now those shortcuts are like, I see this person as a Republican, I see this person as a Trump supporter, I see this person as that religion, whatever. These mental shortcuts then now are becoming converted into bias, and that bias is making us less careful because we're like, oh, playing with that fire could be harmful, and we've learned not to be curious about it, and so we avoid that. So it's kind of this mix of things, and oftentimes those biases they're not necessarily helpful because it's not monolithic, right? If you look at the Republican Party, if you look at the Democratic Party, if you look at any party or any race or any of the shortcuts we use, they're not monolithic. They're not monolithic voices. I'm sure even people who have Trump, you know, supporters in their family, those Trump supporters might have completely different views than other, you know, Trump supporters, and they're pretty. I'm sure there are a lot of Democrats who don't see eye to eye with Joe Biden. Not a lot. I mean, you saw in the debates the big difference between Joe Biden and other candidates, but we see Democrat as the shortcut.
Yeah, just
anyway.
just jump in. Yeah, I want to track you in terms of, I hear what you're saying in terms of biases and the generalizations, and they're helpful, and they can also put us into some potholes. It sounds like you're complete. Did you have a question? Or was that what you wanted to share with me?
That was it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm just tracking time. Should we take one more question or two?
Yeah, we've got a few more minutes. There's so many comments in the chat, but questions is what we're looking for specifically.
I could just say something to some of these questions. One thing I'm noticing, not all of them, but a lot of them have to do with like, how do we work with another? How do we work with the system? The thing out there. And there's also a question around justice, like how can we as mediators, after we affirm our commonalities, how can we support everyone in receiving justice? I feel like this moment for me as a facilitator in the work that I do is transformative for me. So I would just also draw our attention to ourselves and just invite the question, just who do you want to be in this moment, in the groups that you're in? And to the degree that you can model the way of being you want for the groups that you're in is a very powerful reflection. I think I invite that just because the change out there is gonna for sure elicit a change in you. It's not like that's gonna change, you're gonna remain the same person. I just don't think that's gonna happen. So just to invite that direction and inquiry and reflection. Like, what are the gaps that you have in your own behaviors that you want to change? How can you get more intimate with those gaps in your practice? Just to share that.
Oh, Gigliotti wants to say something.
Hi, yeah, bringing this back to mediation, for myself, I guess we could be an example of kind of the oneness and the two-ness, I guess. Something I also do is kind of normalize differences in my practice with, you know, as a mediator. People don't understand that that's okay to come to mediation sessions with very different feelings, ideas, and what they want to get out of it. So kind of normalizing that. And my question is, what other skills can we bring to mediation to kind of bring forth this integration or help parties? Besides being an example, maybe normalizing differences, you know, very transparently. Is there some other ways? Thank you.
What comes to my mind is, as I said, as we become kind of more deeply intimate with these states and ourselves, then we have less judgment about them. So what you just said at the beginning about helping people understand that their differences are intelligent, and that while they may not feel good in the body and there may be genuine conflicts over resources or decisions or whatever it is, that there's something about the separation that may be important, or the conflict that is somehow revealing a form of intelligence, and help them to cope with the sensations of difference in the body and the sensations of threat. And then really helping people experience states of sameness and unity, and to also help them to notice how good it feels in the body and to pay attention to that. So those would be the things that I'd emphasize on this call. Thank you.
Charles?
Julie, I'm noticing the time, and I just want to acknowledge and thank the people who might have to hop off now. Just thank you for your time. Thanks for your presence and your attention and your listening. And I'll be around. I can hang out for a little while to continue conversations and questions. Diane, I know you have to hop off pretty promptly.
I have to hop off in about probably 5 or 6 minutes. I'm here for a few minutes. Yeah.
Well, before we formally end this, if not informally, I want to thank the three of you deeply for the wonderful work you're doing and for your contributions. It doesn't take brain surgery to see how engaged these 175 people were today. So thank you for landing on our planet today and helping us so much.
Thank you.
So formally, we're done, but anyone who wants to and can stay on, it's fine.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
And taking your workshop. So can you give us more details about that? You say you give workshops. Did you?
Yeah. So we're currently in the final weeks of our first 10-week course. And we basically we go through the book, we do deeper teachings on some of the foundational pieces like sameness and difference. We definitely talk about identity. That's an important one for us. We talk about the evolution of culture, and then we talk about some of the maybe basic skills that we need in order to engage. We talk about ground rules that we promote in the conversations that we're having that actually help us to move forward with dialogue rather than let the threats overwhelm us. So we offer things like that. And then we also speak to some of the more contemporaneous issues like political correctness, social privilege, and how we navigate some of that territory. We have a mention in here about strong emotions, and we talk about white fragility, and we have a section on resilience and trauma, atonement, forgiveness. So that's kind of the content of our course, and it's been really, really rich to offer some of the teachings and then just have these conversations, and people can let us know, like, how do they feel about it? How do they process it? Where is it actually, where are the crunchy points in their conversations that are happening outside that we can, workshop together? And, Brad, actually, can I invite you to share anything that you're experiencing? Because he's one of our participants right now. It's really cool to be able to share the time together.
Yeah, no, definitely just two thumbs
Brad,
up.
excuse me for 1 second, it's Chuck. Kim, do you want to put up your slide to remind people how to find the book?
Sure, thank you.
Sorry, Brad, thanks.
No worries. Yeah, I already gave a shout out in the chat, but I, highly recommend it. And what I really appreciate is the opportunity to also, in addition to everything that you've stated, is that we have the opportunity to really practice this in, very focused breakout rooms. Diane, Gabe, and Kim are just wonderful role models because they do a lot of fishbowling, and I really appreciate their transparency and integrity in the process. They're very transparent about where they are in the moment and their own challenges, and it's also a lot of fun. And so I, really again appreciate it and have benefited from the opportunity to engage in these types of sometimes challenging discussions in real time with others who are similarly minded, and
Or not.
or well, similarly minded with respect to process, but not also, and and that's really there's a lot you can do in terms of theory and reading, but when we're actually engaging with each other and reflecting on what's going on in my body right now, it's a kind of a little bit norm bending with respect to, I think, the mediation community. Is that I don't know that a lot of mediators, for example, are going into a joint session and saying, hey, what's happening in our bodies right now? What does that actually look like in a mediation? I think this is a little bit unexplored territory, and maybe it's not appropriate in every situation, but no matter how commercial or corporate a mediation is, in the end, we are just all people, right? Even if you have the CEO of a Fortune 50 company sitting in front of you and it's about a breach of contract, how far do we go in a mediation here? But, again, keep in mind that we're all human beings and we all have bodies, sensations. And so the opportunity, again, just to work with this has been really, really terrific.
It is kind of ironic that we facilitate conversations between conflicting parties, and we don't take time to identify the conflict in ourselves in the moment. Somebody wanted to know when your next workshop is.
I just put into the chat, Julie, that we have two in two different time zones starting in late January.
Great. And how many people are in this current workshop?
I think there are about 130 people who are
Wow.
registered, and we probably have 70 to 80 online each time, or
Right.
90. Yeah,
That's
something like that.
amazing.
Also, the moniker of workshop, just to explicate, it's a 10-week course. So we meet weekly. So you're, you know, we're kind of in it together for a bit. FYI.
If I could
No, I
respond to
found
something
that to
Julie said
be
for a
the,
sec.
I found the biggest gap in my conflict resolution program at Columbia was that emotion was not given consideration. Studied social psychology, which was fine, but there is so much a dynamic of interpersonal dynamics in mediation, and it's kind of like people, I just saw professors who couldn't get the two to dovetail with each other. So that's where I think that we have there's a gap that still needs to be satisfied. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
I think the academic setting is great for theory, but I think when it comes to really the lived experience of helping people work with emotion, we do need a more experiential approach for sure.
thank you, Diane. Yes.
Thank you, Kathy.
Can I throw out a thought on that? It was really interesting. I think, Kathy, I think you were the person that brought up the issue about Peter Coleman talking about resources. It was struck me as so interesting. I had just been thinking about that recently because for several years I did human rights mediation. And what I noticed in the international community, an awful lot of the cases that are brought and issues that come up do relate to scarcity of resources, but not scarcity, not exactly scarcity, more availability. There's, you know, I think a lot of us agree there are plenty of resources in the world for everyone if they were equally available, but they're not. So if you have a government that's run by a particular ethnic group, and it gives services, and then those ethnic group, and there are two ethnic groups living contiguous to each other, and the group that is related to government gets lots of services, and the other group gets fewer services, that group will become very hostile, and that's often the beginning of armed conflict. But the thing that's interesting that I want to get to is what's even more important than the fact that they're not getting services is that they feel that they're not getting services because of their ethnicity. So it's their ethnicity that is also the issue that's under the resource issue. And that is an identity.
Yeah, it could be ethnicity, it could be gender, it could be religion.
But
yeah.
right, but in a lot of the, I think in a lot of the issues that they're talking about in the courses at Columbia that Kathy mentioned, they're not looking under the resource issue, and under it is the identity issue, and that's where mediators need a whole nother level of delicacy and certain kinds of sensibilities in order to be able to work with those groups.
And I would also add that I think one of the big challenges for all of us is, so the reason that I said, and I think you're agreeing with me, Toby, the reason I said framing it as scarcity of resources makes it about the it when it's really about us, right? In the way that we make decisions and leverage resources based on our biases. How do we help people mature and grow out of those very old ways of seeing that someone talked? So human maturity, I think, is something that we need to also start talking about.
Exactly.
Can I just connect two dots in this conversation? I feel like it could be helpful for integrating the sameness and difference piece. So difference in and of itself, as Diane was kind of illustrating and we were experiencing, it's just kind of a function of mind to differentiate. Another thing that's happening though for us, and it's, if we're not conscious of it, it can happen very quickly, is that we're ascribing value judgments. Something better, something worse, something right, something wrong, something more desirable, something less desirable. And when those things become ascribed to human beings and different cultures and people, and we start making things better or worse, then that's, I think, when the the differences, the better or worse, can become incidents of injustice, can become entrenched oppression when it's repeated over very long periods of time, and then become part of this cultural reality that we're in that shapes the decisions around who gets what and when and how, and the access to resource and availability and the ways that we share. So there's some pieces that I just wanted to connect in there because I think it relates to this issue. I agree with what you just said, Diane, of like, it's not about the scarcity, it's about us. Like, how are we doing this?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody,
It's
I
not
have to
interrupting
go.
this train. Harvey Weinstein, I'm sorry, Harvey Newman had his hand up for a while.
Thanks, everyone. I hope we have a chance to connect later on.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
As well.
You've
Thank
got
you
your
so
own.
much.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you, Diane. It's beautiful. So you've got your own last name, huh?
Yeah, sorry about that. Was Ken, I didn't see Ken Newman. Was he on this call?
I didn't see him.
I didn't see him, no.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I just wanted to say how thrilled I am. I used to come to these meetings and say, I'm not a mediator, but I am a meditator. And I'm so happy to see that T starting to come into mediation in such a profound way, and with science to back it up, which I think is so wonderful. I just wanted to bring up the issue of language, and are mediators trained in reframing the language of the people who are in their sessions?
Yes, I would say, I mean, that was part of my training, at least in mediation. And I think part of the reason for doing that was manyfold. One of it can be to help shed some of the aggression or judgment built into how people were expressing things, and instead just pull out what's true about it, what's true about that person's grievance, so that it can be, put on the table and lived with and like talked about. But another reason why I think that we reframe is if we're taking up the role of creating a common storyline so that we can guide who we're working with into a sense of we're going to resolve this problem together, sitting on the same side of the table. That's another instance in which I've used reframes.
And to add to that, also the metaphors. Are you trained to pick up the metaphors that come out in the conversations?
I think we have different styles among us, even in this room, I'm sure. Does anyone else want to speak to this about metaphor? How you might be using it?
Sometimes it doesn't work.
True.
I'm a metaphorical person, and I see these comparisons all the time, but I find when I try to use them, it doesn't always work, and you got to back off and say, you had to be there or something silly in order to let it go.
I'll tell you what I've done in the past that seems to work with metaphors is, that is a wonderful metaphor. Let's look at that for a minute.
Yeah, but if you're giving it, you can't. If it's your metaphor as the mediator, you can't comment on.
And I think that it's kind of interesting to notice, like in ourselves, is that because if you're saying, Julie, sometimes it doesn't work, it might be that who we're speaking to doesn't want to be differentiated from. They want to be received on their own terms. And so we got to be able to know, like, have the flexibility that we can play that jujitsu, with them, and work with the energy so that we can attune when that's the case. When they really just want to be heard in their, in their own expressions, we can honor that, and not like play our own agenda. But then there might be moments where there's openings, and they might be willing to follow and come with us in a different way, and we might differentiate. What could we say it like this? Is this another way of looking at it? And they might say, yeah, I can see that.
So if I can take a second on this, and if you'll allow me to analogize about metaphors, it's a little bit like humor. Sometimes humor can be great in a mediation session, and sometimes it deflates everything and takes everybody in the wrong direction. You really have to be careful about how to use it, because it requires so much mental agility to work with humor and to speak and to listen to humor and metaphor, that you don't always know how they're going to land.
Yeah.
But, on the question of the use of reframing in mediation, and it gets to a training question. I think Harvey's question was about, are mediators trained in it? And it reminded me of something Julie said a minute ago, if you'll allow me this callback. Julie mentioned mediators aren't often aware in ourselves of what's happening in our own internal conflicts. And I can tell you that maybe it was different a while ago, but in the coaching and facilitating that I do in mediation trainings, and many of them are for people going into commercial mediation. We're not talking about, family and divorce or community or some of the really hard-nosed trainings. We do spend some time talking about what the somatic reactions within the mediator and within the parties, and how a mediator can be aware of what's going on in the bodies of the others, and in fact to be aware of what's going on in their own body. I mean, it's virtually every time I coach, I'm calling. We coach during role plays. And they're literally role plays. These are, people are pretending to be the parties, pretending to be the mediators, and you can point out to them, these people don't exist. This is fiction. You never met them before you read this little, one-page handout 3 minutes ago, and you're going to find that your stomach begins to tighten at a difficult point in this mediation session. Your stomach is going to tighten before you even know what the problem is going to be. You know there's going to be a problem in a minute. Pay attention to your body.
Just to hop in, Kim, I just have a quick question for you. As you are wrapping up your first big class training people with your new program, has there been anything that surprised you getting to watch all these new people kind of learn and get deep into what you've been working on?
Such a good question. I think I've observed so much, and it's my first time teaching something of that duration in an online format way. So sometimes there just needs to be a level of trust in it, and people are coming with different, cultural backgrounds, and also different levels of maybe time that they've spent in this area of self-inquiry and relationship work. Some people are quite skilled. They're actually coaches and facilitators and practitioners, and some people are just like, no, I just want to talk to my kids better, But so one thing that I can say that's like surprised me and relieved me is the quality of people's intentions and their good hearts to stay in it. Like we haven't had some attrition rate or drop off rate. People have continued to return after encounters, which I felt a little bit of like after shivers around, just like, is that okay? And then I recognize, oh, I don't need to take care of people. They have their own reasons for being here. They have their own reasons for knowing why this is important. And that's just been like a wonderful surprise. Like I can relax a little bit. Yeah, thanks.
I have to go. I love this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie.
I'm sorry. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Good seeing you, Julie.
Julie.
Actually, I'm going to have to ring off too, but thank you to the speakers and to all the people who are still on. We still have 69 people here, 18 minutes after it ended. Thank you all very much for doing this. It was a great program.
Thank you, Chuck.
Bye now.
Does anyone else have a question or something they'd like to share? Maria, let's hear your voice.
I was just going to say that we can stay. I do know that there comes a point at which we probably do need to end this. So let's say that we'll stay on for a few more minutes for anyone who has any final thoughts or questions. I mean, you can, as Julie said, we still have a crowd here long after we ended. This is such an important and timely topic for all of us. Alan, unmute yourself.
Yeah, it was brought up earlier about survival, and the comment I believe that was made was the survival is tied to belonging, and I struggle with the question of survival. So I'd like you to speak a little bit to it in the context of this session.
Sure, I can give it a go. Can you just remind me, or at least what was the connection that you made with belonging?
I think she said survival is tied to human survival is tied to belonging. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the contrast between that and.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the way that I would speak to this is that it's part of our evolutionary legacy that there are going to be times where we feel like sameness is our route to surviving. If we are so intimidated by the other that we don't feel safe to bring up the differentiation or the point that we want to make that could be challenging, there could be times where we're actually putting ourselves in a position of sameness because it literally feels like we're going to be cast out of the fire if we say something that's out there and become ostracized. And back in the day, to be cast out from the fire meant that you're now vulnerable to predators. And so we can feel that in our nervous systems like a threat of that gravitas. You know, it feels like our lives are being threatened, but we could be having a conversation about identity where no one's going to die as a result of the conversation, but our neurology could be behaving in that way because we are tending to our needs to survive and our needs to belong. I think that's, let me check in with you. What is it that you would like to know about this area, about this topic?
Well, it's you know, the question of flight, fight, or freeze, which is now in brought up as more as pause, as opposed to freeze, or the concept that fear is a bad thing as opposed to it's a warning signal. I'm wondering whether survival and attachment to group is in fact part of that ancient belonging. And in fact, what we're looking at now is the conflict between survival as an individual and the people who feel that survival as an individual versus survival as a member of the group is in fact part of the conflict.
I mean, I can see that being the case, for sure.
Harvey, your hand is up. Is that from before?
I mean, I think
I just wanted to mention.
I think it's curious that we have a societal trend that was based on dissent. I mean, if you look deeply at Christianity, it was based on dissent. It was based on, if you believe, I'm not a Christian, but if you believe in the story of Jesus, it was based on dissent. So it was based on, I don't need to belong to this group, I'm going to create another group.
Interesting, though, to me that it can have that root of differentiation from a norm. But notice that if others coalesce around that idea and coalesce around that philosophy, we're also cultivating sameness too. So someone asked something in the chat, and I think I said, it's the mind of one and the mind of two, like the universe innovates through both. We need to have preserving gestures that concretize and affirm who we are, but then also we're going to have this differentiation and innovation and responsiveness to the times and the new occurrences. So I think it's both kind of a situation.
Yeah,
coming to you, Harvey, I'd love to know.
I wanted to ask if you're familiar with, because I just went through the certification to teach the energy codes by Dr. Sue Morter, and I'm finding that she really embraces all of the things that you're talking about in terms of embodiment and taking it to the body, as she would say. And as I've been employing some of these wonderful practices that she's developed, I'm discovering a new level of serenity within myself. And I'm trying to share that with people, and I'm somewhat successful of reaching out and getting people to understand that, as she puts it, everything is energy, and we are a reflection of that energy. The way our life has unfolded and continues to unfold is a reflection of that energy.
Thank you for that. I've written it down. I'll check it out after the call. I think I saw a hand from Felicitas, and I don't think we've heard her speak. So is it okay if we make that our last question maybe, and then we can kind of close strong together? Does that sound all right?
It's fine.
Felicitas, do you want to hop in here? I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly.
I think she's off the call.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we had a technical hiccup. Okay. Well, I want to just thank you all. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. It's been super enlivening. I didn't feel like it was a 4:30 early flight wake up time for long. I was like, here in present. So thank you all for your energy. And Maria, again, big thank you to you.
On behalf of all of us, and I mean all of us, the organizers and all the participants, this has been truly a most timely and very relevant morning. I can't think of a better session for us to have had this morning. So thank you so much. And to everyone, take good care.
Yes, thank you. And if you've received any benefit from this, please go out and share it with others, because that's what we need, I think, in this time.
One thing I wanted to share is, and some of you have asked, we will be doing these remotely at least through the end of next semester. The City University of New York has announced that we will be operating remotely during the spring semester, which means that we cannot have crowds on campus. So plan on having remote conferences at least through the end of May. That's when spring semester ends. We don't know what thereafter will bring. And who thought we would be having this conversation, Kim, when we first talked about doing this breakfast last April? We thought you were coming to New York.
I know, I was so
thought
hopeful.
this was just a couple weeks stay, and here we are, months later, still talking about not knowing what we're going to do next June. So next month will be John Landy from the University of Missouri. I guess this online environment gives us an opportunity to have our colleagues from around the country. And he will be talking about risk assessment in our dispute resolution work. And I think you'll find that interesting as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful day.